So welcome back to this series where I basically have a scenario, make a story up, say it in Spanish, and then I put the subtitles in English and Spanish so that it's easier for you to follow along. And then I do a breakdown of some of the more useful phrases, vocabularies, verbs, you name it. Now this episode's a bit special because I've started a new series on the Michael Harper Spanish podcast. If you didn't know I have a podcast, you can click on the link in the description below to check it out and listen to it on your favorite podcast source, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I've got a lot of great episodes on there, and I've started this new series where I do more frequent episodes like this, where I do this listening practice. So just go check that out if you're interested in that. Now let's get into the story. This story is all about being on an airport. So if I'm looking up, it's because I'm reading off of the script, because I'm going to put the script itself in the description. So I'm going to say this right now at a normal pace, and then I'm going to say it again, but just a bit slower. El otro día fui al aeropuerto porque tenía un vuelo a Medellin. Llegué temprano para hacer el check-in, saludé al agente de la aerolínea y entregué mi pasaporte. Después de registrar mi maleta, que estaba justo dentro del límite permitido, el agente me indicó que mi vuelo salía a las 3:45 de la tarde desde la puerta 17 y que iban a empezar a abordar a las 3:15. Me explicó que después del control de seguridad solo tenía que seguir las señales hacia la sala B, lo cual tomaría unos 10 minutos caminando. Pasé por seguridad, donde había una fila muy larga. Había muchísima gente en el aeropuerto ese día. Por fin pasé seguridad y me dirigí a la puerta, listo para comenzar mi viaje. All right, so now we're going to say it again, just slower. El otro día fui al aeropuerto porque tenía un vuelo a Medellin. Llegué temprano para hacer el check-in. Saludé a la gente de la aerolínea y entregué mi pasaporte. Después de registrar mi maleta, que estaba justo dentro del límite permitido, el agente me indicó que mi vuelo salía a las 3:45 de la tarde desde la puerta 17 y que iban a empezar a abordar a las 3:15. Me explicó que después del control de seguridad solo tenía que seguir las señales hacia la sala B, lo cual tomaría unos 10 minutos caminando. Pasé por seguridad, donde había una fila muy larga. Había muchísima gente en el aeropuerto ese día. Por fin pasé seguridad y me dirigí a la puerta, listo para comenzar mi viaje. So I've got a challenge for you today with this story. Again, I've got the script itself, word for word of what I said in this story in the description. So be sure to check it out. You can read along to it. And so I've got two challenges, really. Number one, listen to the story over and over again. And then two, I want you to say the story out loud. I want you to actually talk and say and speak out this story yourself as if it were your story. And I want you to be able to keep listening to it and saying this story out loud until you don't have to rely on the script anymore. You can just understand it word for word. You don't have to sit there and, translate. And you can just hear the story and associate it directly with the meaning. So let's get into a little bit of a breakdown. A lot of this story was pretty straightforward, so there's not a ton to break down. A lot of it you can pretty much break down on your own. So I'm not going to go into a very expansive breakdown necessarily. I'll go over some of the verbs and some of the words and that you can use in your day-to-day, even outside of this type of scenario. But el otro día, that's really good right off the bat. El otro día, the other day. It's word for word in English, but it's really, really useful. El otro día fui al aeropuerto porque tenía un vuelo a Medellin. Now, this is one of those instances when you're using tener to have, like to possess something, like I had a flight, tenía un vuelo. You could use the preterite tense and say tuve un vuelo. In this case, we use the imperfect tense, tenía, and you can really use either one. A lot of times I recommend people just to use the imperfect unless you're sure that it's the preterite. And the preterite is triggered by completed action. So if we were to say, maybe like, hey, the reason we're using imperfect here is because we're just describing a situation. And we're just saying, hey, the other day I had a flight. If I had said something more along the lines of like, hey, yesterday I had a flight, then yeah, I could use definitely the preterite tense. And even if I use the imperfect in that scenario, it's not really wrong. It just might sound better to be more specific with the preterite. So the preterite tense is like the specific past, right? The specific past tense. Yesterday I had a flight. This morning tuve un vuelo. I had a flight. But if we're just talking in general, like, hey, I had a flight this day, tenía un vuelo. Llegué temprano para hacer el check-in. So to check in is in Spanish to do the check-in, and check-in is literally check-in. You just say it in like a more Spanish accent, right? With a Spanish pronunciation, but you have to use that verb hacer. Voy a hacer el check-in is I'm going to do the check-in. I'm going to check in. Saludé a la gente, so I saludé, like, hey, it almost sounds like saluted if you want to think of it that way to remember that vocabulary word, but that's how you say that. I said hey, or I greeted the agent. Entregué mi pasaporte. Entregar is how you say to deliver, like deliver a package. But a lot of times in scenarios, you can use it to say like, hey, I handed over, or it's like you're saying I delivered my passport to the security agent, or not the security agent, but the airline agent. But, it's, I gave it to her. You could also say, le di mi pasaporte, I gave her my passport, or le pasé mi pasaporte, I passed her my passport, however you want to say it, but entregar is a good word to know for these types of scenarios when you're turning in documents to someone, handing over documents to someone, or passports, licenses, etc. After registering my suitcase, después de registrar mi maleta, a lot of people might use equipaje, which sounds a lot like equipment, but it's not. Equipo is equipment in Spanish, but equipaje is another way of saying luggage. So you'll hear a lot of times equipaje de mano or maleta de mano. It's like you're saying luggage of hand, carry-on, hand luggage. So I registered my suitcase, my luggage, que estaba justo dentro del límite permitido. That was just inside, dentro, of the permitted limit, or weight limit, límite permitido. So that's pretty straightforward. It might sound complicated, but try not to overcomplicate it, right? The agent indicated to me, me indicó, that my flight was leaving at 3:45. Now, it's salía because it's imperfect. We're saying it was leaving. We're not saying that it left. If it were left, preterite, it would be salió. So again, that's the difference between preterite and imperfect. Preterite is it left, whereas it was leaving, and in this case it hasn't left yet, it was leaving, is salía, it's imperfect. So my flight was leaving at 3:45 in the afternoon from the puerta 17. So in airports in Spanish, we say, door 17, which, what do we say in English? I can't remember exactly. So, que iban a empezar a abordar. So iba is how you say, remember at the beginning we said fui, that's I went. Iba is was going. So this is how we're saying I was going. It was going to start, or they were going to start boarding. Iban a empezar a abordar. Whenever you want to say start doing something, you say empezar or comenzar. That's another verb for start. A followed by the verb without conjugation. The verb in its complete unconjugated form. In this case, abordar. So iba a empezar a abordar. They were going to start to board, or they were going to start boarding at 3:15. She explained to me, or he or she explained to me, that after the security control, or after security, I only had to follow the signals towards the sala B, the B room. So pretty word for word with that. We already talked about tenía, so this is saying I had to, tenía que, and it's imperfect because we're just describing like, hey, this is what you're having to do, that's what explaining that I have to do that. Solo tenía que, I just had to follow the instructions, is what she's explaining to me. Now, if I had to say I followed instructions, like I did it, it's done, it's over with, and it's preterite tense, then I would say tuve que, but we don't have to in this instance. Lo cual, Whenever you have the word which in the middle of a sentence, you're going to say lo cual. Lo cual tomaría, which would take unos 10 minutos caminando, around 10 minutes walking. So we can say unos 10 minutos, unos to say around. You can also say a word that is alrededor de. That's a real big tongue twister. Alrededor de 10 minutos caminando. So that's why it's easier just to say unos 10 minutos caminando. Pasé por seguridad, so I went through or I passed through security. So whenever you want to talk about going through, you could say ir por, like fui por seguridad, but a lot of times when you're talking about security at an airport, like going through, you want to say pasar por. So pasé por seguridad, where there was a very long line, donde había una fila muy larga. Había muchísima gente en el aeropuerto ese día. There were a lot of people in the airport today. So there's two ways to say there was and there were in Spanish. You've either got había, which we used twice in this scenario, or hubo, H-U-B-O. Hubo is preterite and había is imperfect. So again, if you're just describing something like, hey, there were a lot of people there that day, or there was a long line there, then we're just going to use había. When in doubt, use había. Hubo is more like there were a lot of people there, but not anymore. Like they all left. And it's a little bit more specific, more preterite, right? So we're just going to use había unless we're sure that it's there was or there were something there and that it's not there anymore. But we're just describing, hey, there were a lot of people there that day and there's still people there. So finally, I got through security. Por fin pasé seguridad y me dirigí a la puerta. I think we've used dirigirse in previous episodes about, heading towards somewhere. So I headed towards the door. Listo para comenzar mi viaje, ready to start my trip. So I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. I hope you got a lot out of it. Again, it might sound complicated to you, but it's really not when you break it down and you use it over and over again. The more that you say it out loud to yourself and the more that you listen to it, the easier it's going to be to translate this and to use this in different scenarios as well, and you're going to improve your listening a lot. This is one of my biggest listening tips for Spanish, is to take something that you know everything that's being said. In this case, you've got the script in front of you, and so you can listen to it over and over. You know exactly what's being said, and just keep on listening to it until you don't have to translate it anymore. Because think about it. If you're just listening to Spanish but you don't know what's being said, are you really getting anything out of it? No. But if you listen to Spanish, you know every word that's being said, then you're really going to get way more out of it that way. So be sure to check out my free training, by the way, if you want to become fluent in Spanish in as short amount of time as possible. I show you the 3 strategies, my methodology that I use that allowed me to accelerate my Spanish learning and become fluent within a year. I was able to be having real conversations like this with native speakers after just a few months of learning Spanish. So click on the link in the description if you want to sign up for that free training. I'll put it there as well. Or you can go to michaelharperspanish.com and click on Let's Get Started to save your spot in that right now and sign up for that today. So thanks for watching. Can't wait to see you in the next episode. Ciao.